Streaming live, it's another episode of Looks Rare Podcast, and we have a very special guest today. I'm super happy to have Mitchell Chan here with us, someone I've admired in the space for a long time. And it's Pep. And Debussy is probably going to join a little bit later if he has time, but I think this is going to be a great conversation. And I'm really excited to kind of jump in and talk about the stuff going on in the week, as well as what Mitchell's been working on behind the scenes. So welcome. Thanks.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Definitely. And Pep, how you doing today? Nice. Well, yeah. So we were just talking. I guess I wouldn't mind a little bit of an introduction. I've known about Mitchell for a long time. He's actually super OG crypto artist. I mean, honestly, like how many people were even doing stuff when you were first doing NFT art? Would you say?
Not a lot. Right. Like I was making crypto art. I made, my first NFT project in 2017. And at that time, yes, there were other artists who were working in blockchain as a medium and who were thinking about crypto as an art medium. There were people like Ria Myers, and there were people like, Simon Denny, and people like Harm Vandendorpel. And it's to my great discredit that I didn't know any of them at the time. I felt like I was alone on an island. I didn't have to be, but yeah, it's been a long time. There were not a lot of people in this space when I started thinking about the artistic possibilities for blockchain and crypto.
And I have to ask you, just this idea kind of popped into my head, but I have to ask you, when you started, the space has changed so much. Once like Bored Apes came out and all that crazy PFP stuff happened, and I'm sure you never saw that coming. I don't think any of us did. But what was like your initial reaction to all that as an artist?
Okay, so my initial reaction as an artist have been, I would say it started off not good. And I'm not afraid to embarrass myself a little bit here. And then it became, I think, more tolerant. Right. So
sure.
I was working on this project that you brought up on my website, the Digital Zones of Immaterial Pictorial Sensibility in 2017. Right. And that was a project. I mean, it is a really deep conceptual project about, how we can think about blockchain through the framework of conceptual art, and how, crypto is really, for me, just an extension of some ideas that conceptual artists were having like 50, 60 years prior to that. So I'm deep into this. I'm like, okay, crypto, it can be a new frontier for art. And then as I'm working on this, okay, right before I put this out, CryptoPunks comes out. Okay. And I will admit it, I had this sort of a little bit of bitterness about it, because I was like, these are just little pixel heads, man. I'm making real art here on blockchain, man. I have like real conceptual ideas. I'm a real serious artist. These people, this is nonsense, man. This is lightweight stuff. And I didn't claim any, right?
Man.
So whatever. So I got my punishment, right? And then sort of as time passed and I saw what CryptoPunks became, I think what I didn't realize at the time, and this is something I'm guilty of a lot, is when I am working on something, I have my blinders on, right? And I'm really only thinking about, the project, proper, and sort of what is within the boundaries of that project. And like, CryptoPunks and PFPs ended up being so much of a catalyst for communities. I know that's a little bit of a meme, but just the fact that these PFPs took off, they really did end up saying something like very profound about how we present ourselves in digital and virtual spaces, and like what is the value of that public presentation that we make to ourselves. And like, so by the time things took off, I was like, damn, CryptoPunks was like, I don't know if it was there from the start and I just missed it, but it turned into something, really, it turned into something that is like a legit, cultural phenomenon that's sort of worthy of serious thought. And then, the other projects that come around, that you talk about is just sort of like, like the Bored Apes and all, the other dozens and dozens and dozens of PFP projects. I mean, for me, I just look at that as, it's just a bifurcation of, what NFTs are, right? Like not NFTs were never supposed to be just about art. There's, in the same way that, receipts aren't just for, art, right? They're for all sorts of products. And we're seeing the applications of them into collectibles and utilities and stuff like that. I tend to so I tend to have a pretty relaxed attitude towards those things. I get a little bit uppity when people try to apply criteria that I don't think belong to some of those projects, but for the most part, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because I think, well, what I was thinking about your project, IKB, the thing that really strikes me is the fact that these artists, what was it, 60, 70 years before this, however long ago, when they first came up with some of these abstract art concepts, it's amazing how well it fits into the to the blockchain. And obviously they had no idea what a blockchain was. And if they could go in a time machine and come here now and see what you did with it, it's crazy. It's such a cool evolution of all of it.
Yeah, I won't get into the whole thing, but this project, if anyone's, curious, right? This project from 2017 was accompanied by this essay. The essay is pretty long, but it's not a hard read. And it just talks about, the history of one artist in particular named Yves Klein, who was really thinking about how we commodify artwork and really what is an artwork. And yeah, I did think there's just a perfect analogy for blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Just the idea that something can have that something's value does not originate in any physical referent. It's such a great way to think about crypto. I thought it was bang on, and here we are, sort of 5 years later, and I'm lucky that a lot of people agree. So I won't go into it, but the paper's out there. And if people are interested in the history of conceptual art and blockchain, there it is. I'll
echo that. It's a great read. I think it's 34 pages, and so it's really interesting. And I would definitely encourage anyone to go out there and read it. And we're not going to talk much more about this because it's so complicated. We could talk about it for hours, honestly. But I did want to. I did want to just say that it really seems like it was ahead of its time. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, kind of way ahead of its time when you put it out.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it didn't get much popularity. I mean, there wasn't anyone around then to even really notice it, right? So when did it become a thing?
It became a thing around 2021, right? So these tokens that I'd made, these artworks, just sat in the contract unminted for about 3 years. And about 2021, some people started to discover it. You have some people who are searching the blockchain for historical projects, but even before they found it, I was hanging around the NFT community, telling some people about it, right? So it was the person who got the last Series 0 out of the contract was Snowfro. That was
no way.
Wow. Yeah, that was back when he had time to kind of goof around the blockchain for a little bit in chat rooms. I was like, yeah, I made this NFT in 2017. Some collectors from the CryptoPunks community found them. And then word sort of started spreading, and it never got it's always been a pretty small community of people who like the project a lot, right? Because I'm not a big shill guy on Twitter. I don't have a ton of followers. I'm not out there tweeting about my marketplace or anything like that. So it's a small community of people in the know.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, mad respect for that project. It's crazy. And then you did an early art blocks project as well, correct?
Yeah. And it was same idea. This is what I do. I look at the technologies that we're using today, and I think, what? There were some, ideas in art history that really help us understand this in a more interesting way. And so my art blocks project, it was project number 118 on art blocks. And it was, it's called Lewitt Generator. And that is talking about another conceptual artist named Saul Lewitt, who had this revolutionary idea that he would just make instructions for an artwork, and, however people follow those instructions, that's kind of their business, but it's still his artwork, right? And that to me is like, that's generative art. Like that's what we're all doing. We're writing computer code. We're writing somewhat more complicated instructions that, when you write them, everybody's code has a certain style to it. There's a certain poetry to it. And then those things are, executed, but they all have the same sense of authorship and the same, point of origin in these instructions. So I made an art blocks project like that. And, that came out just sort of right at the beginning of like peak art blocks froth.
That was a crazy time. Now, which part of the art blocks was this on? Was this on Factory or?
It was on Factory.
Yeah. And then so how did that work back then? Did you have to talk to Snowfro directly, or did they already have a board set up that would kind of talk to you about?
They've always had a board. And the work went through the board. And like when I was submitting, right, like art blocks wasn't huge yet, and I was thinking, I'll be lucky if this thing, mints out. And, so it goes through, it took, months, and then it just happened to be like held back and delayed until like it was by pure coincidence that it came out sort of peak of the market.
Was that summer? I remember summer being the peak of the market.
Yeah, it came out in August of 2000.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was a crazy time. So we were talking a little bit off air. I would love to get your thoughts on what's been on everyone's mind, at least in my little Twitter bubble this last week, has been the QQL project from Dandelion and from Tyler Hobbs. And it's launching tomorrow, I think. And so there was a contest today on Twitter where they picked the 9 best ones from the contest entries and gave them all a prize of getting to a mint pass. And I think the top 3 got minted as well into the project. And just curious kind of what your thoughts are about it. I think most of our listeners are probably relatively familiar with it, but maybe to give a 1-minute breakdown, it's a generative art algorithm where you have access to it when you connect your wallet. You can select different parameters, but it's not clear. Like, it's not like they change everything. Like they subtly push the algorithm different directions, but in a way, the algorithm is still kind of the boss and is still making these random outputs. And then what's cool is you can put out a bazillion outputs. It takes some time on your computer, but you can put out as many as you want, basically, if you're not limited by time. And then you can pick your favorites, and then you can kind of dig into your favorites and see what characteristics they had. And you can try to like remake more of those. But what I noticed is that even if you have one that you really like and you do all the same parameters and you make 1,000 more, like none of those 1,000 will look like that one necessarily. So it's kind of interesting. And then what you can do is you buy a mint pass, and then which is going to go on sale with the Dutch auction. And then if you own the mint pass at any time in the future, you can pick one that you made that's assigned to your address and then mint it. And then no one else can ever have that one. And so there's going to be a lot of flipping and speculation on these mint passes, but it's also going to be interesting to see like who decides to mint and when they do it. I'm sure there'll be a rush to mint initially, like to get the first few. And then there'll probably be a lot of people who wait, I would guess, because it's almost like the more time you have, the more likely you're going to get a better output. By better, I guess, meaning like one that you like or one that you think. I mean, there's always speculation, right? So there's going to be people who just want to keep it, but there's also going to be people who are trying to make one that the second they see it, they go, I'm going to be able to sell that one for a lot,
Yeah. I mean, like the sort of market game of how this is going to work. I have no clue and not a ton of interest in that, to be honest. Look, the project's really interesting in the sense that it's like exposing, it exposes the parameters to users, right? All of the checkboxes that you can check and the sliders that you can sort of move up and down are, things that would have in the code presumably had, functions to assign those parameters to, right? And I don't know. I think generative art right now, it's been so successful, and we're at this weird point where I think artists can go kind of 2 ways, which is that they can continue to kind of innovate gadgets, like the tech of it, right? Or, they can attempt to employ, some of this generative art into more real world conversations, as you would see kind of more typically in the art world, right? Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, I think I don't know. I guess how much of it do you think of it as being a code? Like if you're creating this kind of art, let's say Fidenzas, where the audience had nothing to do with it. How much of your art do you feel like is from code? Like you're like, okay, I'm a coder and I can make code art versus being a visual artist? Or is there any kind of distinction between the two if you're making that kind of art, do you think?
No, there's a beautiful thing that happens whenever you use art to make code, which is like, it's like, you're typing out characters and lines of code and you're kind of seeing how it's going to turn out in your head, or at least you have an idea of what string you're tugging on. And, sometimes it surprises you what the effects are going to be. And so it's like, it's cool to give that sense of discovery to the user, right? To let them pull its strings and see, what happens and discover the algorithms like that and its potential. But then there's this question of, look, my honest question is, what does it do that, say, the character creator in Skyrim doesn't do? Like that's another place where I get to, adjust sliders and, see visual effects, and it's all algorithmically generated, right?
I think part of it, at least, is the game of if there's a consensus where everyone agrees that, oh, that one's really good and you made it. It's sort of like this jackpot, like, slot machine mentality where you're just making more and more and more and more until you find the one that you're like, oh, that's awesome. And then it gets even more validated if you share it on Twitter and everyone else goes, oh, that's awesome, and you're like, oh, I kind of made it, even though you really didn't make it.
Well, no, I mean, okay, so that's the interesting thing that we can talk about here is the authorship, right? It is that sense, yes, you made it, right? And so the artists have provided this framework for which is the algorithm. And then instead of leaving it up to chance, where the token hash is going to determine exactly how that algorithm spits out an image, you give the user some agency into it. And it's just, it's a fun thing to do. And I think it's a fun thing for the users, right? My honest sort of critique of it would be that it fits into this real sense of like this NFT space. There's a lot of this sort of populism in establishing aesthetic tastes. And it's just like, do you want to feed into that? Or, would you have wanted to go in the other direction and actually take more control, more ownership over your outputs and your aesthetics?
Yeah. Are you kind of saying that no matter how much you tweak it, most of the control is not up to you? Is that sort of what you're saying?
See, here's what I would like in an artwork like this is for the artwork to make a statement about that, right? About where the sense of authorship lies. Because I think this is the distinction between, art that exists in an artistic discourse and these sort of experiments that, we see online the difference is that, art that enters into a discourse, it's like when Babe Ruth called his shot. Okay. That's what you need to do to be an artist. All right. It's not just that you swing and maybe it goes over the fences. It's that you call your shot with intention. And so it is just like, I wish that there were more intent about what it is that we're trying to say about authorship in this piece.
Yeah, I was thinking of that as well as far as intention, because it does kind of seem like even if I don't know if this is exactly what you meant, but this is kind of my criticism of it is let's say I make an output that's awesome and it looks really cool, but it's not like you can say, oh, hey, what were you thinking when you made this? It's like, well, I wasn't thinking anything. I just clicked a bunch of buttons and it popped up and I liked it.
Exactly, right? But there would still be intent, but you know that there's intent on behalf of, the original coders, right? They're designing these algorithms very specifically to allow like a broad range of possibilities. But then, you can make the argument that maybe just aesthetic intuition as a user is, kind of moving sliders back and forward. Maybe that's a type of intent. And maybe intuition and instinct is an underrated form of intent. In fact, maybe it's like a type of intent that maybe the art world doesn't value properly right now. So, that would be, one of my arguments in favor of the project.
Sorry to interrupt you, but could you say something similar about maybe Jackson Pollock? Like for me, when I was a kid and learned about him, my initial reaction was, that's so stupid. He's just, splattering paint. But then the more I think about it, it's not that different, right? Like he has this system that he's doing and he doesn't maybe necessarily know what's going to be the final output, but it's not random, or it's not completely random. And so certainly people still consider that to be very good art.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So there are a couple of things whenever we bring in, these historical precedents, right? So Jackson Pollock is a really great example of somebody who is using intuition a lot within a very constrained set of parameters, right? Like he knows that he's going to use paint. He knows his body is a parameter. The size of the canvas is a parameter. You can always see on a Jackson Pollock painting that the flows of paint tend to start to arc around as he gets to the end of the canvas, right? There are two things. One is that, Jackson Pollock is one of those artists that we tended to venerate in that period of time. And maybe we still do, right? The mysterious, moody, alcoholic genius, right? And whether you think that's right or wrong, and I think that today we would generally consider that to be stupid, and we probably shouldn't have, elevated, people like that to the degree that we did. These Jackson Pollock paintings are undeniably a connection to his process and his intuition. And I think that, it's not entirely wrong to think of artworks as like, connections to some sort of auratic presence of the artist. And I think that these pieces really depend on the sort of ghost, the spirit, the myth of Jackson Pollock to be at the center of them. So authorship is still very much a part of them. Now, secondly, is that intuition really is based in the physical body. And to look at one of these paintings in physical space is to sort of, you're left with this trace, this sort of ghost of another very, very physical performance, right? So I think that medium specificity is something that is really underrated because it's not something that we even would have thought of in the 1950s when Jackson Pollock was making these paintings. Like there was no digital art. Of course, these artworks wouldn't have existed on a screen. Of course, they would have a physical presence in front of us. So I think that, I think it matters whose intuition. And I think it matters, is the action appropriate to the medium?
Really cool. Yeah. So I was listening to Tyler and Dandelion talk about their kind of thought process with creating it. And I thought of kind of a funny analogy. You know how when you're a kid and you got the Cool Ranch Doritos and you always search for that one chip that had like the most crystals on it or whatever, that was the one you wanted. And it's sort of like they're getting their audience to all pick that one chip. And then instead of being 1,000 where a few of them are like that, like literally every single one is that special one. But it's almost like sometimes it's almost too much of a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really funny analogy. Like now we got to ask the question, like we'll put it in market terms, right? Can they all be grails? Like if they're all grails, are they also all floors? You know?
Right.
But there's this desire, like, in this space right now, we want to give collectors everything because collectors are demanding everything. And I'm just, and I suppose we'll figure out when all the mints are out if that's possible,
Well, I think it'll be interesting to look back to, and I mean, I don't even know how many will be minted right away. Probably not a ton, but way later, you might look back at the collection and go, "Oh my gosh, that one that initially was kind of underwhelming. Now compared to all the other ones, it's quite interesting." And so I think it'll definitely change over time.
Yeah, and how many of them just stay as mint passes, right?
Well, yeah, there's going to be a few. I mean, I don't know. It's crazy. Like, imagine 10 years from now, and like how many will be unminted? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. But the other interesting thing about that from a market standpoint is, and they actually announced this today, but I immediately thought there's got to be some kind of secondary market for people who find a good one but don't want to pay the money to mint it. And sure enough, they're going to create a marketplace where you can transfer that to someone you can sell it. Mm-hmm. So it's not an NFT you're selling; it's just the ability to make an NFT that you're selling, which is kind of interesting, I thought.
Yeah, that's we'll see how that turns out.
There was a project called Avastars. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah. I remember Avastars.
Yeah, remember? Yeah. So it was ahead of its time, too. I mean, to be honest, I don't think the art's very good. And I think most people would agree the art's not very good. And that's probably why it hasn't caught on. But from a standpoint of like all the different things that they did first, it's quite historic. I mean, first of all, they called it Avastars because back then we called them avatars. We didn't call them PFPs. It was not too long after CryptoPunks became, pretty popular, or not sort of popular. And, Jimmy is the one who created it. But what's very similar to QQL is what you could do is you generate these in your browser and you're logged into your account. And then when you found one you liked, you could star it and save it onto your account. And then when you exited your browser, all the other ones went away. And so QQL is the same exact way. And then later there actually was a secondary market where I forget exactly how it worked, but I think if someone else minted yours, you got like a little bit of the money. And so similar concept, you're basically farming out all these generations you're decentralizing it sort of, and letting the community go through and pick the best ones, as opposed to like you trying to do it or as opposed to doing it randomly. And so, interesting concept.
Yeah. And look, so like there's interesting things that you can say about that, right? Like, is decentralizing in that sentence just like a metaphor for outsourcing labor? Right. And then, I mean, seriously, a person creates this mint and then a person who just has more capital can basically reap the financial benefits of it. Right. Let's suppose I design a Grail in QQL, but I can't afford to mint it myself. Right. And so, I sell it for a small fee for somebody else to mint it, and then they retain the property rights over it and sell it on for a larger price. Like, it's just here, that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, that's a conversation that you can have in doing this, right? Like that you could.
Yeah, I think the outsourcing is interesting. Maybe another way to look at it would be if you're an artist, you can only look at, so let's say you're Tyler Hobbs and you're looking at 1 million. Like, you can't look at 1 million. Sorry, you can't look at 1 million outputs, but 1,000 different different could look at that more easily. I mean, eventually your brain just kind of goes, I can't look at any more of these. I can't process this.
Cool. So is that a form of outsourcing labor? And like, I'm not saying this to like and suggest by any means that the project is like problematic, because it's not, right? But I'm just saying that, like, I made this comment earlier about, whether we want to be in art conversations or whether, we want to just continue to sort of like blindly, push new wrinkles into the tech. Right. And I spoke earlier about intention, about calling your shot and what we're doing here. And this is the kind of thing that I mean, which is like building new tools and new ways for people to engage with generative algorithms and stuff like that is very cool. And it does a service to artists. Right. But there's like a way to do that where you also dare to put yourself out there with a statement, a thesis, a hypothesis, right? About how, what this could mean in a larger conversation. That's what I'm saying. And so it's just like, I'm reluctant to put any sort of like critical art lens on, any project that doesn't really like, posture itself to want to take that on. You know what I mean? So that's why I have a difficult time talking about a lot of these projects, because, I don't want to you know, disrespect anybody's work by trying to analyze or critique layers that were never intended to be there in the first place. Because a lot of people on Twitter do that, usually to pump their own bags, and I find it quite obnoxious.
Yeah, I think we have so far to go as far as art. Like, I don't even see many art critics in the space yet, and it's almost like there's this toxic positivity where I get it, like you want to be respectful, but it's like we can't criticize anything ever, you know. And I don't think you don't grow out of that, right? Like, I think it's okay to say. I mean, I'll say it right now. I don't think Tyler Hobbs's. I think it was his second thing, the incomplete control. I did not like that. I did not think it was good. And I put out a couple of tweets, and then I realized I probably shouldn't do that, because like if I'm saying bad things about Tyler Hobbs, then people will like cancel me or something. And I didn't want.
Yeah, I know. And you're probably going to get murdered by bag holders. You know, it's tough.
Yeah, and I was a bag holder. I didn't want to hurt my own bag. Not that anyone really cares what I think, but you know.
I'll say I saw these in person, and they're actually quite nice in person. And you know, yeah, I'm more comfortable. Look, this is, you know, what I say about criticism in the space, right? First of all, like artists, you know, what can you do about this? Critique is really important to grow as artists. And, you know, as I'm working on my next, you know, project here, I've realized that like what I need to do is just, you know, put out, you know, some invitations to, you know, friends, other artists in the space whose opinions I admire to, you know, give me critiques. Like I'm going to set up critique sessions for my work. Those are small, like they're not public, because, you know, real critique is kind of like an intimate thing. It's generally not going to go well on Twitter, no matter how well it goes. So, you know, I mean, set up intimate conversations with a handful of people who really understand what you're trying to do, right? And then in terms of the larger issue of art criticism in the space, right? We have a couple of issues. Like I'll say this, I am never, ever negative on Twitter about other people's work. And I'll be honest, I actually I've sort of regretted that a little bit. Like it means that I haven't called out some stuff that was just blatantly a cash grab that, you know, I should have called out. And it doesn't mean that I like endorsed it or even like, you know, was complicit in that kind of like, you know, cash grabbing or anything like that. But the reason why is because I do feel like a lot of the artists who are in the NFT space are pretty much new to art as a professional practice, right? Because, you know, a professional artist was not a sane thing to try to be up until a couple of years ago. And it might not be a sane thing to try to be next year. But there was a period of time when, you know, it was a really viable career path. And that's really cool. But I never really thought that, you know, and so when I would see bad work on Twitter, which there is a lot of, you know, I feel like why discourage those people? Hopefully, you know, people stick with it. And if 1% of the, you know, sort of bad artists in the space grow to be excellent artists, that will be awesome. That would be just great. So like there's that element to it, but then you just see the opposite happen where so many people just coming up with the most specious like of justifications for their bags. And it can be quite infuriating.
Yeah, people's bags talk loudly, don't they?
Yeah, and if I just have to read one more tweet thread about how like so-and-so, like so-and-so is going into the MoMA and is of like such incredible cultural reference. And I'm like, dude, this is a Blender tutorial, you know? Yeah. But it's this thing, you know, it is this thing. Here's what happened in the last 2 years, right? All of a sudden, like, you know, I don't know if all of a sudden these artists started acting like they were all investment geniuses because their ETH was going up. But like there were a lot of people who were like, you know, smart and early to crypto who all of a sudden, you know, felt like they were genius art critics. And like, that's not to deny anybody the right to their taste, which of course everybody has. But this was combined with such a knee-jerk reaction to take down gatekeepers and, you know, anybody who would have, you know, committed a serious chunk of their life to like actually understanding the history of how images developed and the cultural context that led us to this point. Like it just became absurd.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, when you study art, you learn who were considered the great, masters of their time. And there's reasons. It's not just random. And it's not just because some rich guy collected it and liked it, although I guess maybe in some cases there's always rich people collecting in the background, but
oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. We got to be honest about that too. Like nobody's like nobody's perfect on either side of this thing,
Well, cool. I did want to, before I want to talk about your project. One other thing I wanted to bring up was, were you aware of this Art Blocks curated announcement that they just came out with a couple of days ago?
I just heard this saying that there's not going to be any season numbers anymore.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure. Yeah, and so I don't know exactly what it means. Snowfro did jump in on one of the conversations on Twitter and said, just to let you know, we'll still be doing curated drops, but they won't necessarily have the same parameters, meaning like we could do a much smaller edition, for example. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe it's freeing up the ability for them to call something curated. And I guess it won't necessarily be on a schedule, and it won't always have to have 1,000, and it won't, those kind of things. I don't think
I'm not
1,000,
sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I just saw the announcement, and I hadn't looked too much into it. I understand the messaging is a little bit confused right now. So, but ultimately when it comes to those guys, I have confidence in what they do. They tend to always really think before they act, and they really do think a lot about, the collectors as well as the artists. So whatever they're doing, I'm sure that it's going to be I'm sure that it's done with a lot of good intent, and I'm sure it'll turn out just fine.
Yeah, no doubt. I think Xinc has joined us. Are you there, Xinc?
Hey, what's up?
Oh, hey, Xinc.
That's going. Yeah, I just got off another podcast. So.
Oh, nice. Were you on one with Jimmy?
Yeah.
Oh, don't tell him I said Avastar's art wasn't that good. Don't tell him I said that.
See, it's hard. It's hard to be critical about stuff. Also, it's like such a small community. You know?
I know. Right? It's different though. Like you could say punk's art is kind of whatever. Like you can have it was early times, right? So everyone was kind of throwing out whatever they could out there.
Look, is that
plus
thing?
They were doing something. Oh, sorry.
Oh man, I was just going to say, you did a really good job of walking us through the ways that it innovated and the ways that it developed some technology that is being used right now. And that was really cool, right? And so the success of all these projects just comes down to what is the criteria on which you want to judge them? Do you want to judge them as art projects? Do you want to judge them as technological experiments, or do you want to judge them as market assets, right?
Yeah, and I think too, it was a new technological thing, right? So they're trying to it's kind of has that each little trait is just a piece that to fit together across a bunch of different things, right? So it's not easy to make something like a collage always look good every single instance. Mm-hmm. Because it's like the little SVG things, right? That was the little technology on chain. Each of the traits was on chain. So there's space limitations too. Anyways, we don't have to argue about that.
Well, the on-chain thing is pretty cool too, because that was actually the reason I was attracted to that project. That allowed me to kind of learn about what on-chain meant. And then I realized that punks were not really on-chain, just the one images of all of them. And then, Jimmy really thought it was important to kind of take punks as a inspiration and then build on it. And one of the things he wanted to do is make it on chain. And I think that did limit the art for sure. But the fast forward to now, and I don't feel like anyone really cares if art is on chain. And I'm curious what you think about that, Mitchell.
Look, on-chain art to me is interesting only in the way that it explores the boundaries of what we can do in blockchain. This is one of the services that artists provide to society, is when society produces something, artists break it. Okay. They are quality control in a sense, right? And so like these are really cool experiments, right? When you think about like, let's go back to Bitcoin and you think about the artists who started trying to like put data, in the data fields of Bitcoin transactions, right? Like graffiti. All right. They're misusing this technology. And people got mad when they did that. They were like, oh, you're making the whole blockchain bigger. This is not like, this is not considerate of, other operators, stuff like that. Right. But boy, was that a really important way to misuse that technology. All right. Because it, led off like it was like this domino that ignited all these ideas that came to, oh my goodness, what if there were blockchains that were for, hosting, chunks of data, even computer programs, even smart contracts, right? So this is a really important thing to do, just as like technical experimentation, right? When you do it with intentionality to show some of the things that the blockchain is capable of and some of the things that the blockchain is not capable of, then you have this important service of artists and, really interesting stuff to think about. Like I was, I'm a huge fan of Def Beef's work because the ways that he's using the blockchain are so innovative, like stuff that I never would have thought of, right? It kind of opens up some new ideas. So that's really cool, right? But basically just this argument that like, we just have to store data on chain so that it's like, now it's forever. And now, forever I've pissed in this snowbank and now it shall remain cryogenically preserved for all ages. I don't really care. Like, I don't really think it's like so important that, your like signature lasts forever because there are, I'm just as inclined to trust culture, to do some amount of preservation, right? Like if we have an important historical artwork, we do a pretty good job of preserving the stuff that needs to be preserved. I would like to think that my stuff will be, preserved by, museums with proper like conservators. And also like this stuff, this data that you put on chain, like it won't matter in 1,000 years if the codecs are different, right? Or if like, that language doesn't exist anymore, if it can't be compiled into anything, right? So it is just like you need social layers of preservation.
Yeah, and the other argument, was like, oh, what if there's an apocalypse or whatever, and the art that you own gets like the image is lost, no one has it. It's like, well, if you bought a digital painting for a lot of money, wouldn't you at least download it to your computer and like have a copy of it yourself? Like, like you still have a copy.
Exactly. Like you're right. It's really weird because like NFTs, the idea of having a file hash in the metadata is built around redundancy, right? Like it's built around redundancy that we can just all have them and just confirm that they're the same, like confirm that they're right. Also, if there's an apocalypse that destroys all the art, getting my JPEGs back is going to be like the 4,000th thing that I'm worried about.
Yeah, I know. I don't think people realize that Bitcoin's not a very good hedge against the apocalypse because if computers aren't working, you're kind of screwed.
Terrible hedge against asteroid impact.
I think there's like maybe there's just a little bit of like maybe not for like one-of-one art and like art you think is going to be important. It matters whether it's on chain or not. I do think for like certain collectibles, you don't trust the company is going to who runs the thing. Like there can be collectibles that are valuable even if the company doesn't exist anymore, right? There's plenty of baseball cards that are very valuable that the issuers are entities anymore. And so you would want to have some sort of physical thing, which I think the on-chain thing kind of provides digitally that's different than maybe downloading the picture of your, if it's a Bored Ape or something like that. If that was on chain, you would have that kind of hold on to a little harder, like a physical card. You can kind of keep your own without having to worry about Pokemon staying in business or not. I think that's the main argument with it.
Yeah, that's a reasonable argument, but I think that then it just comes back to how much redundancy is built. Like that's a question about like the decentralization of data, right? And who you're going to trust to store your data. Because I think that if you buy, a Pokemon or whatever, and and there are social pressures that you can apply to Nintendo or Niantic or whoever is the company that actually owns Pokemon, right? To store on like non-Nintendo servers and have proper redundancies, because ultimately, like as we know, like storage on the blockchain it's so limited that we wouldn't be able to get super cool Pokemons on chain, anyway, unless, right, we're using an alternate chain, like, right, like unless we're using whichever, which even then is just going to have nodes and who's operating the nodes.
Another kind of interesting point along that is I was talking to Hackatow a while back, and they had an early piece. I think it was Rare Art Labs, I want to say. Isn't that the one where the XCopy ones were too, like the really old ones? And it went out of business. And they actually had falsely associated the wrong image with one of their tokens, and they can't get it changed. And so it's almost like that's almost makes it cooler, but like, because I was going to buy one is where it came up. I wanted to buy it from someone, but it was kind of suspect. I'm like, I don't even know if this is real. And so I was able to contact them, and they said, oh yeah, it's real, but this is the deal with it. And I think it was something minor. It was like, it was supposed to be a static image and they made it a GIF, or maybe it was the other way around. But they're like, it's really not, like, we don't like that piece because it's not really what we intended. And so I didn't buy it. But I thought that was interesting because, if it was on chain, theoretically, that would be solved, that problem. But.
Like in terms of being able to modify the linked image?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess if they put it on chain wrong, it wouldn't help. But,
yeah, it just, it kind of,
so I don't know.
Yeah, it kind of depends whether like you allow access to that. Whether you allow access to that data.
Well, I guess like what Xinc was saying, if you are certain that they put it on right and it's on chain, then you can rest assured that later on, even if that company goes out of business, it won't matter. Whereas in this case, they made an error and then they went out of business before they could fix it. Yeah, so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, the end, it's just like some sort of authentication. Like you can download the image, but you still need like proof somehow that is the image associated with that token in the end, right? And so, I guess like this is a problem we've had with art forever. Obviously, like authentication of whether this is a real piece or not, and I'm sure digital art has the same problem.
But I think that's what the hash does, right? The hash does validate that like it is this file and no other file, right? That is linked to this token. Like the bottom line is if you run the JPEG through SHA-256 and the right hash comes out, it's like, that's it, right?
Yeah, that sounds on chain to me, I guess.
Yeah.
Another cool project was Mutant Garden Seeders. You're probably familiar with that. Yeah, so I think that was a good example of what you were saying earlier, where they kind of pushed the boundary at the time and said, we're going to make this kind of living piece of art that changes over time with the state of the blockchain and never stops changing. So I actually own one, and you can go on the site and look at all the different permutations it's had over the years. It's really cool. But just because they did that doesn't mean like every single one in the future that, like, if you're an artist, it's like, you don't have to like integrate state changes in your art. Like they did it, but it doesn't mean everyone has to do it. Right?
Yeah, Mutant Garden Theater. That's another one of my favorites. And yeah, it's a brilliant like technological innovation, and I think that like even Harm, I think often says he's like doesn't believe that work has to be on chain. It's just an interesting constraint for him. Like he really likes the challenge of trying to make beautiful work that that fits into these constraints.
Awesome. Okay, well, tell us what you're working on now, because I actually don't really know anything about it, and I'd love to learn.
Oh yeah, all right. So this is very exciting. So I should like preface this by saying, whenever my next work comes out, like it has already been over a year since I have put out work, like for the market. I have not tried to sell any art for over a year. And it's not from lack of work, because I've been working every day. And, we could have a whole other conversation about, how artists, treat their market and what is, the right frequency to release at and whatever. But I believe in going really slow. And so my next project is something that looks a lot like a game. And it's this idea of artworks that exist in virtual spaces, right? I mean, we're all talking about these like metaverses, right? And art for the metaverse. Well, this project came about like sort of at the beginning of the pandemic when all these galleries were going to make these online viewing rooms. And they were just terrible. You know, you'd be like walking around, it'd be like Wolfenstein 3D with blurry JPEGs as texture maps on the walls. And I was just like,
Exactly.
this is not like, and guys, if we're not careful, like this is what metaverse art is going to be. Like, I don't want to walk around Wolfenstein 3D, all right, and look at blurry JPEGs. When we're in virtual worlds, like, and like as an artist, like be sensitive to your context and recognize you have the opportunity to create such different types of work. I'm sorry, just a moment. Honey, in like half an hour.
I think that was a direct jab at On Cyber, by the way.
I mean, whatever. Like that was an interesting experiment, right? But like what I'm saying is that when I look at the being in a virtual space, right, I see opportunities to create different types of work, interactive works where like, you know, the idea that works are generative will be not even noteworthy. Like, of course they're generative. Like, of course they recompose themselves according to user inputs, according to context and stuff like that. But it's more than that, because the other thing that we did in NFTs was we rebuilt, for better or for worse, right, this entire sort of like meta infrastructure around artwork, how we talk about it, how we frame it, how we critique it. Now, we were talking before that, you know, that hasn't always been good. And there's like a lot of like, you know, BS out there. However, like I want to create not just the artworks, but the world in which the artworks exist. So these are interactive experiences as artworks. These are, you know, 3D assets that exist inside virtual worlds that I've created. And I don't want to call them metaverses. I'd rather just call them video games, right? And, you know, they all sort of, and I think that when you get somebody to interact with your artwork as you interact with a game, right, that interaction becomes a part of your medium. And you can do really cool stuff with that, because I think that we operate in the world right now in ways that really feel very, very gamified. And so those are my projects, and they're called, and it's called Beggars Belief. And there's a series of them. The first one will be out in December.
Yeah, I'm playing around with the little demo right now. It's kind of fun.
So what marketplace will you use, or how will people initially be able to get involved with it? Is there a drop, or like, how does that work?
Great question. So I haven't really decided on the marketplace yet. I can tell you that the first piece in this project, thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, so people can see like sort of what I'm doing here, right? The first piece in this project is actually going into a museum exhibition that I'm actually not allowed to talk about yet, but it's a fantastic exhibition with some fantastic artists. And I can tell you a little bit that the piece I'm working on right now is it's a response to a painting that was painted in 1865. And it's a digital version of that painting, except that when you click on the painting, like you are in it. You are like playing a game inside of the painting, right? And so there's a few different ways that, you know, people can collect this, right? One is that the assets within those virtual environments, like are artworks, and those assets should be able to be transported from my game environment to like whatever future metaverse spaces exist as sculptures. And then there's the sort of game itself as a work of art. So right now you're playing through, this was a demo that I made, and I made it so that nothing was for sale. I just wanted people to be able to like take a look at what I was doing and what the aesthetics were and what sort of the narrative and storytelling goals were. And it's just this idea of like, you know, I wanted to make something where every frame of this could be like a digital painting. You know, I was so like, you know, I put a lot of thought into every shot. I designed every shader on the character and in the background, right? You know, the animations, things like this, so that you could freeze frame one of these things and it's, you know, a digital image you can put on your digital screen or whatever. But it's also like, why are we just making JPEGs of the 3D environments that we create in Blender and then render them out? Like, why don't we make them fully interactive experiences, and take advantage of all the storytelling possibilities to like really say something? Now that's kind of the idea. And it's really big and it's really ambitious, but it's just like, look, the easiest way to think about this is like freeze frame this. And it's just like, okay, is that an image that you'd buy on Super Rare? Okay, you can play the whole thing.
That's so cool. Yeah. Until I saw the images, I didn't really understand, but that was the first thought I had was what you just said. Like if you freeze any frame, it looks like a piece of work, like a piece of artwork. And
I just
that right there could be in a frame. Like that's so cool.
Exactly. Like that's just like I'm trying to create these portraits, but then like these portraits, like they have context, like they're just moments in a narrative, and I've designed the narrative, and it's just like it is what they would have. It is what we would have called Gesamtkunstwerk. It is the total artwork.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Forgive my ignorance, but I did take art history a long time ago. But there's one of the most famous pieces of art at the Art Institute of Chicago, and it's the lady has the umbrella, and they're at like a
the Sora. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of that, the way you did the coloring on the especially on the awning there.
It was just
building.
like, thank you. Did you go to the Art Institute?
Yeah, I used to live in Chicago, so I went there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Me too. I studied at the Art Institute of Chicago.
Oh, no way. Okay, yeah.
I lived in Humboldt Park, where I hope you didn't live.
No, I was in school there, so I was in Evanston. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Like this was so like to make this stuff, I'm like, I went in and like, designed those shaders, right? Specifically to have that style. And like, you want to talk about when I say like generative art, we should just take it for granted. I just wrote a piece of code that would like make all those non-intersecting dots, right? Of varying darknesses, and then design the shader algorithm to only bring out certain dots depending on the lighting conditions, right? This is all, it's just all of these concepts that are just baked right into the art. And when it's working, I don't want you to even notice it. That's just the thing. Like, I don't want you to like think about, like, this is not about how clever the algorithms are or whatever. There's a statement. And if you play through like this demo, right, it is about what we treat as collectible assets, right? It is about what confers social capital by collecting it. All of that other stuff, sliders, the algorithms, it's all just in service to making an artistic statement.
You did all the writing too, right? It was you.
Yeah,
it is.
There's not a single other set of hands that has touched this.
Wow.
It does capture the last year and a half, I think, pretty well. A lot of the dialogue.
So this was just a demo, and it's not for sale. Yeah. And the next one, it will be out in December, like the first one proper. And like I said, I can't say too much about it because it is associated with a major museum. But it's titled "The Croquet Players, 1865," and it is a scene of a croquet game.
So, is it a one of one? Can you tell us that, or?
This one will be probably be an addition, and then the next ones after that will be one of ones. Except for one series, which is a game that specifically produces generative outputs.
Cool. Okay, so we have to talk about digital displays because they're killing me right now. I mean, I don't know why there's such a backlog, but I'm still waiting. I feel like I have to wait another 5 or 10 years before I can have my dream room that displays all my NFTs, and I might be completely broke by then. But like last summer, I was like, "Let's go! I'll pay whatever. Just give me a good frame." But I have no way to display these things, and it's something like this. It's super ambitious. Like I feel like I can't wait until we actually have ways to interact with this or display it in our house.
So look, my thing is like, as an artist, and particularly as an artist who studied architecture and who did public art for like 10 years. Like for 10 years, I made really big sculptures that go in parks and plazas and stuff like that, right? I think that as an artist, it is your responsibility to think about and take ownership over the way your work is going to be displayed. And there are two ways about this. You can be really persnickety and have like a really detailed like rider contract for your artwork, which a lot of artists do and are, and like museum curators and stuff will go with that. But we're in a different era, like a sort of more populist era where I believe that, people should have the right to experience their artwork in different non-ideal settings as well as ideal settings. So it is like, here's what I do for when I'm looking at my art and when I'm creating my art. First of all, both my art blocks drop and this piece that you're looking at and all of the Beggars Belief pieces like refit to frame, to whatever frame you're on, right? It was important to me that if you look at it on your phone, sure, maybe it seems like a little bit of a shame that you're looking at this thing I put thousands of hours in on your tiny little phone, but hey, you know what? It's yours. So fair enough. It may not be the best experience, but you're going to have an experience with it. And I'm not going to be super duper like precious about it like that. That's up to you, right? My art blocks piece also like rescales dynamically. And then, so ideally, like when it goes to a museum and a physical display, I'll have instructions and I'll say, I would like this, this thing will look the best at 16:9 ratio and whatever. I also like to design optimally for 16:9 because that's the screen that everybody has in their house. You probably have a really nice 16:9 screen that you use to play PlayStation. For myself, for looking at other people's art, I have a Samsung The Frame. All right. It's a TV. It's a little bit more expensive than a normal TV, but a lot cheaper than some of these like purpose-built NFT square frames or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I put my work on it. And all my work that is 16:9 looks great on it. It has a nice little, like it's low glare, has a nice little wooden frame. It's like really, it fits really flush into a bookcase. I love it.
That's funny you say that because I actually have one of those. I'm renting a house, but it came with one of those, and I couldn't really get it to work. Like I would, it was the scale, it was the framing. It wouldn't crop it correctly.
Yeah, I do. I sometimes do a little bit of like work in Photoshop to like, get the, sometimes I would rather like live with the spirit of the work in my home than deny than deny myself that spirit because I can't get the pixel perfect representation of the thing. And hopefully the artists that I'm displaying aren't going to be too upset with me about that.
The big issue I have is anything dynamic. They say, so if you say with the frame, you can't put anything like genre pieces that don't have an end or something like that, or you want to put like maybe like Aaron Pence rituals on. And so you have to like screen share, but then I find that the frames, these TVs don't, when they have to screen share from a computer, it becomes way too bright or gets the colors way off. So I think we're still like far away from like say a lot of generative pieces that have like a dynamic component that it's very hard to display this kind of thing. So.
Okay, that's true. So what we need to do? What we need to do is we should be able to make this on a Raspberry Pi, right? Mm-hmm. The answer should not be that we all like have to get like computers with these like blockchain explorers built right into their hardware. That's just a way that they're going to take more money from you. We should be able to code up a Raspberry Pi media player that we just plug in and does exactly what we want it to do, right?
Yeah. But I find that the TV operating systems are just not very well set up. They're very
they're so
they
stupid.
Lock everything. You can't really do much with them.
This would be a good little side project for some. I should do this if I ever have time. Yeah, is
like make that media maybe. Player.
No, just a little just a little $40 Raspberry Pi that'll go and do and trawl the blockchain and update your dynamic NFTs. That'd be good. But look, artists should do this, right? Like artists should be doing this for their own work. I do believe that the artist has the responsibility to to either define the parameters for the viewing experience or to facilitate it.
Because I do feel like there's such a big disconnect, especially at the higher end, in terms of how much people are paying for some of this art and the completely you're on your own.
Yeah.
For how you to display it, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like if you buy a painting, like you have a little bit, at least, you can go at least to a framers and have them tell you exactly how to frame, or the artist can tell you how to do it. Like it just, there's a huge disconnect in terms of the amount of money gets spent on NFTs and the lack of any sort of money that goes into display technology.
Yeah. We're going to open up an NFT framing shop.
Yeah, I mean, someone needs to. this is funny. So the options are so limited, and I did get an infinite objects of a chromie squiggle, and I think Xinc, you got yours too, right?
Yeah,
Yours in the mail.
yeah.
It's so cool. It happens to fit that particular frame really well. It's a video frame, and it's customized. Like you can't change it. It's only that. And so you connect your wallet and you mint it. In this case, it was this other thing with this Venus over Manhattan gallery. But anyway, it looks really cool. So I went on the site yesterday. I said, well, I want to get another one of these of something else. And I started going through my wallet, and I clicked on an Xcopy Max Payne, and it showed it in the frame, and it looked really cool. I'm like, I think I'll get that. And I tried to buy it, and it says on there, this artist hasn't given us permission to use this. And I was laughing because Xcopy's works are all CC0, but like obviously they didn't get the memo. And so they're like, can you please message the artist? Or one solution is you can message the artist and let them know. And I'm like, okay, I'll message Xcopy. We'll see if he responds. But like what the hell, And I looked at their site, and 99% of the NFTs I had in my wallet, I couldn't actually buy a frame for because they hadn't figured out that detail of it.
That's interesting with like the digital rights versus say the same thing but physical. Like there's all this whole other legal thing that's put on top of it that probably doesn't exist.
Okay. I figured this out. Okay, this is a pet project for one of your listeners to do. I know that somebody who's listening to this can do this. Okay, because I thought about this. All right, what we got to do? We're gonna make these standalone boxes. Okay, I have the hardware here. All right, and we need a Raspberry Pi. Is going to do two things. It's going to read your NFTs. It's going to function as an always-on IPFS node, all right, that pins your NFT metadata to make more redundant backup and serves images to your TV out the HDMI port. This would be an extremely useful thing to do. You can do it with $40 worth of hardware and a little bit of your time, and then whoever's out there who's entrepreneurial, buy the $40 Raspberry Pi, flash the disk images on it, and then sell it for like $400.
Yeah.
I love it. I'll buy one.
I do agree because like connect. That's the one thing I really want, like an iPhone app or something like the Raspberry Pi that just very easily throws the images up onto the screen, because otherwise it's just a nightmare. And then something you can also adjust the like crop it and things like that. Mm-hmm. So a little piece of software that lets you quickly set it to your TV.
But I had an idea on that part. I feel like for most artists, certainly not for every artist, but for most artists who are just putting up stuff on the OpenSea contract or hopefully something better like Manifold, I feel like they should have like 4 or 5 templates, and you just have to pick one of them. And so from then on, when you're buying a frame, you just match it to that, right? Like it's a standardized process. I'm surprised they haven't already done that. But.
Yeah.
What do you think, like, part of this, like I know there is definitely established artists who are artists before in this space, but it does seem like there is a huge cohort of people who this is their first experience as an artist, or they found success. Yeah. They've never been professional artists before. They don't necessarily have the training, but they found their audiences. Do you think there's a lack of experience in terms of that would be just a normal thing? Maybe someone who was professional artist before with training would have known to deal with versus not necessarily amateur anymore, but someone who didn't go through that way. Maybe it was Instagram.
Yeah, I absolutely. And like, yeah, this is the thing. It's just a lot of, like I said before, it is a great thing that there are so many new people who are new to the art profession. That is good. Okay. But like, yes, these are things that if you've been doing this for a long time, like you think about and you care about, and, things were really easy for the last couple of years, when you decided to become an artist and you're halfway decent about it. Now would be a good time to, take a step and think about some of these other issues.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I was just thinking just how short really, like some people have been here a long time. You've been here a long time, but really this boom is not even 2 years old, right? Like it's so wild.
Absolutely.
And everything moved.
Yeah. And to be honest, like I'm so excited for like 2 or 3 years from now, because a lot of the people who operate thoughtfully and slowly and with intention, right? They, were slow to enter the space because they enter things thoughtfully and with intention. And they're just now starting to build stuff, right? And there's actually more, there's like more exciting stuff from like a quality perspective happening right now than there was a year ago, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly more exciting stuff from a quality perspective than was happening 2 years ago. And this stuff is going to come out, and look, the market ebbs and flows, but cultural value is up only if you put in the work.
Yeah,
I love that.
Slower.
Yeah, I was kind of down on NFTs. Just so you know, we've all been in the space a while. I've been into NFTs since like 4 years. And anyway, I was kind of as down on them as I've ever been maybe 3 months ago, just because of most of the market dynamics and just the kind of amount of ridiculousness you're seeing everywhere. And then just this last 2 weeks maybe, I've been more inspired than maybe I ever have been, just by all the different things I'm seeing.
Oh yeah, me too. I feel exactly the same way. And what I'm most encouraged by is, people in the art world that I really admire and respect, who are like really engaging with this and trying to put together thoughtful things, and bringing really talented, brilliant creators and artists into the fold, and using this as an opportunity to elevate their work and ideas. And also it was just like a lot of those people who were like slow and quiet over the course of the last 2 years, like they were looking around and they were a lot more open-minded than people gave them credit for. And they were also like discovering new artists through this process as well. I think it's going to be fantastic. I'm actually like really full of optimism. That's awesome.
I think a good barometer check is when you're at Thanksgiving dinner and your family's ridiculing you about your connection to NFTs. That's usually when things are good. When, like 2 years ago or last year, when they're like, "Hey, maybe I should make an NFT," that's when things are really bad.
Yeah.
But on that note of optimism, guys, I apologize. I'm going to have to excuse myself.
Oh no, we went on a really long time. I really appreciate it. So great for you to join us.
I've got a family who's bugging me, but guys, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'd love to come and chat with you guys anytime.
Awesome. And keep us posted on your project, Beggars Belief. It looks awesome. I can't wait to check it out on your website. And we'll talk soon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. It means so much to me.
Thanks, man.